the woman who runs this society is called the Chancellor. And it is told to you upon the blurb that Jude has been roped into a plot to assassinate her, with the thinking that if you behead the beast, perhaps the world will change. And in order to do this, he has inveigled himself into being with her for the night, using a system that is put in place where boys are sold to women for their company and companionship and for the boys' protection. And through means both exciting and I hope terrifying and thrilling, he has got into her boudoir. She's taken him to the garden at the very top of the tower, and she's meeting him and talking to him about herself. It's my job to protect life, to protect our tower, the Chancellor purrs. I do what has to be done. She doesn't mean protecting boys. She means protecting women who can vote, who can merit her for saving them from the terrors beyond our walls, who don't need to worry about where they'll sleep, about what they look like, about the failures of their namesakes, like weights on their ankles, or whether they'll be disappeared if they misbehave. I try and listen, because somewhere in her speech might be a clue to what she wants from me. But she still goes on about how much she cares, that no one cares more. No one has sacrificed so much. There's another voice inside my head, not your voice, not Walker's. It says, what if all she wants is someone to look after, someone to see the garden, someone to protect? Other chancellors, she tells me, had statues made of them, glorious celebrations. There was so much love, but what have the people ever done for her? They should be grateful. They're ashamed of where she came from, and I must understand that. Do you know how much that hurts, Jude? To be so misunderstood.
What was the inspiration for The Boy I Am? Was there like a moment where you were like, this is the story, or how did you come to it?
I think it was 2013, 2014 I started writing it, and I don't remember the spark. But I remember what I was playing. It started off as a flipped Romeo and Juliet.
Okay.
It's a little bit where the names come from. Romilly and Jude, who are the main female character, main male character, and it was a dual narrative. And I spent a lot of time with Romilly because Romeo in Romeo and Juliet has a lot to do, and Juliet is the most passive character ever. And I think then I became obsessed with how passive Juliet was, or my male version of Juliet. And I thought, how on earth have people fallen in love with this character she makes two choices. She falls in love with a man, and she takes poison that a man gives her and tells her she should take. And I thought, this is one of the greatest female characters to be played in theatre, and she has no action whatsoever. And I became obsessed with that. And then I spent more time with Jude, and I wanted to say, how can I make a character that has been told to be passive, that has been educated to be passive, and that has been forced to be passive? How do you make them active and give them choice? And what does that mean? I think that was one of the moments. There was a moment when I walked in with my housemate, I think Sophie, who may be on the call today. She was watching Memoirs of a Geisha, and another little moment of inspiration came to me, like, what if this were men? And I researched it and found out that actually there were a lot of male geishas before there were female geishas. It became a fascination for me, this sort of table turning, and eventually the kind of Romeo and Juliet conceit drifted away, and a real story took its place because I gave Jude something to do and something to push against, and an awareness of this world. There was a moment as well where a mutual friend of mine was talking about growing up in under, I think, a communist regime, and said about those little victories, those little moments of pushing back. You can't do it on a big scale. And there's exactly that line in the book, because I took it out of her mouth. So there were lots of little moments, and along with coming out of a project and a part of my life where I was working with a lot of misogyny, working with a 200-man team where there were probably 5 or 6 women, where I was one of the women in power. and where that was pushed against a lot, and it hurt. And it was the first time I really felt my femininity, and I felt what it was like to be a woman in that kind of world. I, for a long time, not ignored it, but hadn't seen it, and had forgotten I was a feminist. And I'd learned about feminism at university, and then suddenly it was thrust upon me, and I was like, okay, how do I deal with this? I kept asking myself the question, if I was a man that I worked with or a boy that I knew, how would I talk to them about this problem and this challenge? And what literature would I recommend to them? Apart from, the obvious, what would speak to them the most? And I couldn't think of anything.
But why was it so important to do this feminist novel, this pushback against power from the point of view of Jude? And you've mentioned the Romeo and Juliet thing, but I kind of feel like there's more to it than that.
Probably loads. I'm sure I could write essays on it. People you meet may. I think the thing that was at the time that I started writing this, well, there was a lot of pushback from women on whether or not they would call themselves a feminist or could call themselves a feminist. And I always debated whether I considered myself an equalist or a womanist, which is another fantastic concept. Comes more from black feminism than white feminism. And I remembered the things I'd learned. And again, I kept asking myself this question: how do I speak to the men I work with, the people I know, about these things that bother me? And how do I do it in a way that doesn't come across as preaching and that helps me listen? And there were lots of, I think I had a moment with a teaching professor, Andre Dubus, word theatre. And he was talking about empathy in novels and about how you speak to the reader. And, how putting, if you do it right, it's taking your heart and putting it in someone else's. But it's really hard to do, I think, especially with young men and young people, if they can't see the mirror in themselves. And there was a lot of conversations about mirroring in literature and in young adult literature specifically, especially when it comes to, a lot of protagonists being white, kick-ass women. That's not everyone. And I started to think, I could write another book about a white kick-ass woman, a strong female character. We're not all strong, and there is weakness to everybody, and that includes the men in our life, or the people who do not identify in any gender as well. And it's important to speak to them about these concepts, because it's feminism and any other kind of concept that looks at power. It's not about your biology, in my opinion. It's about a differential in power, depending on what society you're born into and what the structures and systems are around you and how they continue to enable that. And that was how I ended up doing an awful lot of world building, because I had to ask my question, why would a culture like this grow? Where would it come from? And I do believe there's a difference. I do believe women are generally less aggressive, but it's still possible. There were men I spoke to who had Me Too moments themselves with women, and so it is possible. And so I wanted to investigate that and put something out there that hadn't been said, that reiterated important points that need to be heard by everybody, not just women.
I think that's one of the things for me that the book did so well, was that gender flip had me looking at things that happen to girls often, the binding of our bodies or the way we're asked to present ourselves, and seeing that happen to young men made me go, well, why do we accept that? Why aren't we all up in arms going, no more?
This story felt like a coming of age story. It felt like a place where someone's trying to find themselves and find their identity in a system and in a world where you're being told you're something all the time. You are this, you are meek, you are sweet, you need to be this, you must be that, you have to do this. And yet inside we all feel it. I don't care what the outside shell is, you always feel, well, why do I have to do this, especially when you're a teenager? And so it was it really sat in that age group, in that genre world, because it's the time you start questioning the world that you've been brought into. And that's Jude's superpower in this story. He's one of the few people in his friendship group that is asking the question, but why?
That and his ability to dance. Those are his two things.
Oh yeah, that and his amazing ability to dance. Yeah. You got to give him something, you know.
But I think that fit, and that ability to dance, because to dance in the way you described you dancing, you will have to have that sort of, well, especially for him, because he lives in a world where he is told to be meek and mild and to not take up space. So his dancing becomes a form of protest, a form of pushing back against power. Yeah, I love that one. We've been talking about that kind of the visibility and the visualness. I'm wondering if we could talk about masks. Why the women wearing masks? Why the boys binding their eyes? That might be another little plot point. What was so important about vision and being seen or not being seen?
I've had a lot of thinking about this, obviously. I think the going back to kind of research, I did a lot of research into veiling, and into clothing history, and into the kind of the history of women being told to cover up. And I don't have any, you know, this isn't about a religion, or this isn't about expressions of modesty for religious purposes. This is about the fear of the female form. And there was two ways I could have played it. I could have played it the other way. I could have made the boys feel like they need to cover up. But I felt that in a society where women have been, fashion choices and the way that we wear our bodies and the way that we present ourselves to the world, the way that we expected to present ourselves to the world. I mean, an example would be, there was a couple of months where I wore a tie to work and everybody looked at me weird because it was just so not normal. Because the uniforms were expected to wear, and the way that we get judged by them. I thought that the natural expression of that, the furthest you could go is actually the extreme, which is the onus on the other party to hide their eyes, as well as, you know, in the moments that you have to share each other's space, you know, the women choosing to cover up, and taking that as a choice, not for you know, fear of protecting themselves from boys, but for protecting the men from them. There was a conversation I had with a colleague of mine who lives in Dubai, who has no religious inclinations, who was talking about veiling his daughter because he was afraid of the men in the city that she would be growing up in. And it really struck me that, why is it the girl's responsibility to take that on? Because of the fear of what men might do. And that fear of men, that can go through any gender. And I think leads to some of the worst parts of feminism sometimes. It kind of professes itself in this kind of masking of the boys and masking of the women. And also creates that divide, that othering. You know, it marks the women out as special somehow, and not to be seen, and a corrupting influence. So it kind of takes present day concepts and it pushes them to an extreme that feels uncomfortable and mirrors in some way some of the choices that some women in this world, including myself, in different ways, have to make about the way that we present ourselves in order to protect ourselves from men.
For those of you who haven't yet read the book, it's a really interesting theme running throughout the novel, this notion of looking and being looked at, and where the power lies with who's looking, who's being looked at, and flipping some of our expectations on where that power might sit. I'm interested in names in The Boy I Am.
Mm-hmm.
So particularly the boys' names, and I don't know if we're giving too much away to kind of tell people the way the boys are named.
They have a namesake. The names are passed on. So Jude Grant is not the first Jude Grant. He is the umpteenth Jude Grant since the one that they identified as being responsible for something in a war. And it's the idea of carrying legacy. It comes from the concept of the sins of your father. And I wanted to lean into that idea that, you know, men are often expected to follow after their fathers. There's a positivity there, but there's also a huge negativity and expectation. And also, you know, the fact that women carry their father's name in modern Western society, large parts of it, except Iceland, and actually Spain in some areas. You know, there is this expectation that we take our husband's name. I took my husband's name and I love it, but mostly because I prefer it. It was a debate in myself, but that was my choice. And I think that it's right that other people choose to question theirs, because you're carrying this legacy. And what it does, you carry your father's legacy, but it erases your mother's. I did my family tree, and I found it so difficult to find out my maternal family line, because it just goes. It's erased. It's really hard to find marriage certificates. And so I wanted to play with that same idea, that you are entrusted with a legacy that has a weight to it, and that has there's a level of force is the wrong word, but there's a level of discomfort with it, because that's not your identity sometimes, especially with these boys who don't know their parents, who have no parentage effectively. Their parentage is whoever carried their name before them and how well they lived, and the sins that they carry with them. And that's why they have nicknames for each other, because it's a way of expressing and a personal choice of identity, that kind of gang culture between boys, young men, and young women as well, to say, you are not this person who you're telling us you are. You're the person who we tell you you are. We tell you you are stinky. We tell you you are, limpy, or, they will end in Y.
Nicknames are great.
Oh, nicknames were wonderful. And I remember when I came up with Stink, he's my favourite character. I love him so much because of his bad breath. And he wanted to be called, what's his name? He wanted to be called something really strong and powerful, but everyone calls him Stink. And it shows camaraderie and fun. And I have every name under the sun, despite being called Catherine. So, I'm not picky about names, and they always follow me around. I'm interested in them. I'm interested in what we call ourselves in other people's company, what we call ourselves at work, how we name our children.
It's that interesting, the tension between the name you're given, the expectations that the world has for you because of the name that you're given, but then this kind of pushing back against that with the name that the boys choose for you based on some bit of your personality. And even then, perhaps it's not the name you would have wanted for yourself, as is the case of our poor dear friend Stinky.
And Jude never gets a nickname that he likes.
But then he also becomes the boy. And the kind of the boy I am of the novel. And that's I suppose the point, spoilers, but he's trying to find his identity, and the reason he doesn't get a nickname is because he doesn't know who he is yet. But I want to talk about the world building and the tower.
Yes, it's a phallic symbol.
Thank you.
Or anybody, of course it is. It's a tower. All towers are phallic symbols, are they not?
And there's a garden on top.
Oh yeah, just dig into that. Dig in. It's there. What I wanted to think this tower was from the first get. I'm a big fan of Gormenghast. My parents for that, and another friend of mine pointed out similarities between, my world building and Peak, which was basically the best compliment anybody could give me in my life. There was a lot of. I wanted to make it a closed environment. I was inspired by High Rise, fabulous book. I'm a businesswoman. I've worked in pretty much every big building you can imagine, and they are my life, and I'm obsessed with them. I was also lucky enough to go up the World Trade Centers when I was like 11. So I've long been obsessed with big architectural towers. I'm not going to let anyone read into that. That's just me being a nerd. But I like the idea that this tower has specifically been built by the world that came before and has been abandoned, and it's the idea of this new female culture taking over an abandoned structure from this before time, and yet falling into the same traps of the culture, that hierarchical culture, the idea that the higher you are, the better you are. I also wanted to play with the idea of an earth scraper, which I just love, and I want to live in one. So the idea that there's above and there's a below, there's a whole lifestyle and tower below the tower that goes down, and that the boys and anyone in this underclass lives there. And the idea of taking over something that is a huge representation of modern, pretty much misogynist culture, but are also beautiful creations and great achievements, and shows that actually, even in this world that has its flaws, there is beauty. I think they're beautiful. There you go.
Can some really geeky nerd that's in the audience read the book and then do me a map of the tower, like? That I like, my geeky nerd self would really love a map of.
There's a few architects on the call. I'm sure that they can work on.
I'm like, fan art would totally appreciate this contribution.
So this is a longer reading. I'll do a little setup again. So this is after the events that we just heard where Jude met the Chancellor. Hey, the boys in this culture, I mentioned that there was a moment of inspiration around Memoirs of a Geisha and that idea of serving women. So the boys in the House of Boys, which is a group of the boys and men in the tower who are literally designated for service and entertainment. They survive and they earn money or merits in the system. There's a meritocracy of kind, and it wants to be. They earn merits by hosting appointments. And over the course of the years that Jude has been in the House of Boys, and specifically the last year, he's had one young woman who has repeatedly come to his appointments. And she smells of rain, you know, that petrichor smell. And so they blindfold themselves in the appointments so they can't see women. And he doesn't expect to see her again. And this is when she returns and he remembers those moments he's met her before. One time, a few months after she started booking appointments, she just cried. Girls don't cry. The daughter of the Chief of Peace wouldn't cry, so Rain Girl probably isn't Romilly Vaux. Before that, she'd come a few times, 3 or 4, and not said a word. And then she just turned up and cried. I thought my only friend was dead, and I couldn't tell anyone. I didn't want to be accused of being emotional on top of everything else, even when grief ate at me. But here was a stranger who could do everything I wanted to do. She could show her emotions, come and go as she pleased. I had to stand there, be good and quiet, and hold it all inside. Something, maybe the passions the house fathers always warn us about, made me reach out, take her hand, hold it. Her fingers felt rough and hot, her fingernails short, jagged and torn. I knew she could have told the stewards. The list of punishments tore through my mind. Demeriting wasn't enough. I'd probably lose my hand. Bad thoughts pushed into my mind, the urge to lean into her, find her lips, kiss them. Even if every bone of me knew she wanted the same, or even if she just wanted to ask. Boys can't do that. The lice don't even send us to the mines if we're caught. Just a one-way trip from a high balcony to a hard floor. The next visit, I asked if she was okay. And that's when she started talking. It was hard to stop her then. Every woman that booked an appointment ignored me or wanted something from me, except her. She just wanted to talk.
Right, first question from Leonie Atkins.
Oh, hello, Lee.
She says, hi, Casey. It's been so inspiring to hear you talk about your process of building the world for the boy that I am, the one that it takes place in. How did you know or feel when you got it right?
I didn't have to do any more. It was one of those kind of things where I just felt like a couple of people, and my editors said it, Matty and Katie said it a couple of times, like, you know this world so much better than us, but we're not getting it. like, because I just felt like I lived in it. Also, so much based on our world. It's some of it's not, or some of it's based on the past, or some of it's based on, you know, other countries and other cultures. A lot of it on Western, but you know, there were things that were just were, and I was just writing from a slightly different perspective in a slightly different way. There was one thing that the moment where I felt maybe I was going too far was when I did a population graph. Yeah, that was early in the relationship with my husband, and I was drawing a population graph for how the population would grow over time from the 24 people who started the society. By the way, it only takes 24 people to repopulate a planet. And I worked out the population graph, and I thought, maybe I don't need to do this anymore. I think I've probably built it. When I had a Bible that was 20 pages thick of how the the financial system worked, of how the legal system worked. I mean, I did a degree in economics and politics, so it was the fun part for me, and I could have done that for another 5 years, but I eventually had to realise that I had to put somebody in this world to live in it. So yeah, probably there was a point where it did feel natural, and I didn't have to do it anymore, and it felt like those moments that came in the story that were from the world just flowed, rather than had to be thought about in advance.
Ben Oliver would like to know, do you have a writing process? Do you plot first or just wing it?
The process for this book was different from other books. Previous books I wrote, I just winged it, and it took me years and years and years and years and years. For The Boy I Am, I wrote a plot. Like I said, I originally based it on Romeo and Juliet, so I took the whole plot and I reversed it, and I played with it, and I set it in a new world, a new setting, and then bit by bit, working into it and finding my story, parts of that fell away and drifted away, and there is very little of that original left, apart from the character names and sometimes the positions. I think the Chancellor was originally based upon Paris, and there was a character called Mercy who was based on Mercutio, who went, and Vic was based on Tybalt. So though, I had a shell that I sort of slowly ripped away and replaced with my story, and that isn't necessarily the process that I'm using for the next book I'm writing. Yes, I am writing a next book. It's not a sequel, but I do like to have a plot, and then, sorry, Matty, I like to deviate from it horribly.
What's the point of having a plot if you don't deviate from it horribly?
Yeah, and then I like to analyze what I've written, and say, what is the story in here? Where are the things where's the parts where I'm just having fun that don't need to be there, and the parts that need to have more time spent on them that are absolutely critical for the plot. So then I get into analytical mode and, story beating and things like that.
Very good, very good. Monica Baum would like to know, what was the maximum number of drafts this book baby went through before reaching its final form? Can you even count them?
I could not count. I have a process where I do a major draft when I change plot, kill a character. So I up the number. So if I change a plot, kill a character, move a significant amount of text, I go up and make a number.
Yeah. But
any time in between that, I just let it be. This final draft was 18. So I had done 18 major changes, to get to this draft over the course of 2013 to 2020, 7 years, 6 years.
Very interesting.
And Monica's seen some of my process with some of my incredibly detailed page by page analysis, and sometimes I go that. Yeah, nerdy.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Mandy Rabin would like to know, why does the new female society fall into the same unequal power dichotomy as the male society that preceded it?
Oh, that is a really good question. It would be really boring if it didn't. But also, I think that, humanity is, we're going to be facing this power versus, unpowerful for a long time. And the minute that one group takes, dominance, you have it. And that constant battle for equality is the human condition. So I think that one of the things that inspired me, actually, I didn't mention it earlier, was that idea of, I think when it was the universities, we were talking about the pendulum of politics and how you go from communism to, more left-wing fascism and things like that. And often it's a circle and it just comes back round. And I remembered that, and it played on me. And I remember that saying, things get worse before they can get better. And it kept playing on me. And I kept thinking, what would be worse than today? Because there's been a lot of developments. And I kept thinking, what would be worse is if we fell into that same trap. If women were in a dominant position and we fell into the same traps and didn't learn from the past. And yet I think it's also, I don't think this society is likely, but I think that power shifts, and there'll always be this battle for dominance. And the best that we can do as good humans is strive to make it better, and be as equal as we can and as empathetic as we can, even to people we disagree with or who are different, and always look at ourselves and the privilege we have. That's why.
As long as there's dominant hierarchies are in place.
And it was a thing I came to to believe through writing this book. I didn't believe that at the beginning. I thought everyone would be perfectly fine. We would be brilliant at this job. But you know what? We're flawed. We're not perfect. There's no point putting women on a pedestal. You know, if you believe in equality and they believe in equality of the sexes, then there is a possibility that we would screw it up just as much as anybody else.
Yeah. But I've jumped down to one from Angelina and Alex. Hi, Kat. What did your characters teach you that you were surprised by?
Which characters? I was surprised that I could write dark, evil people quite as maybe well as I do. I don't know. That's blowing my own trumpet. I really enjoyed writing the Chancellor far too much. I learned from Jude to listen a lot better. He's good at it. I'm terrible at it, or have been. I learned a lot more compassion from him. He, you know, when he meets Romilly and he works with her, he doesn't see her gender almost, despite the world he's grown up in. And like I said, I work with a lot of men, fantastic men, real mentors and real supports. You know, I've had my meeting moments and I've had people who I would never want to work with again, but seeing others as human, regardless of the package that they come in, and flawed and capable of redemption and capable of deep, complex thoughts and other things, even terrible presidents and terrible politicians. It really helped me grow my empathy, and it really helped me look at the world around me. And I do not like the phrase woke, but it helped me become more awake to the challenges others have, even those who have privilege sometimes, or seem to have privilege. So to listen and to take a pause and to, you know, sometimes be okay with sitting in the middle.
Ella Widet has asked, as a debut author, yay, what was your favorite part of the process from concept to publication?
I got a publishing deal, to be bluntly honest. I mean, this is pretty damn good, but the moment you know that book is going to reach an audience, you can write until you lose breath and never find an audience for a story that you have inside you. And many people do, many incredibly talented people do. And knowing that what I had written or what I was trying to do with this story would find people who weren't my direct family, who weren't just my writing crit partners, who were people who this book might touch, and might touch in the way that books have touched me in the past and inspired me and made me think. That was the day I had a good tear, because it's all we ever want as authors, is to have an audience for what we create. There were fabulous moments on the way. I mean, Tom Trong's cover, the first time I saw that, blew me away. The moment I got editing notes from Katie and Matty and realized other people got this, like what I was trying to do, people who I respected get what I'm trying to do. That was great. You know, when amazing agents like Alice, like James, saw something in me and wanted to take it on, they're endless. But yeah, that moment where I knew a publisher wanted to bring this book to the world, when Little Tiger, you know, bought this book, was, I'll never forget it.